In this video, we're going to be talking about an overview of how to survive from negative positions, because as a white belt, just starting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and honestly, through a lot of your Jiu-Jitsu career at different belts, especially when you're rolling with people better than you, you're going to be surviving a lot and having to not only survive, but turn around that
You're going to be trying to survive a lot.
Yeah, trying
not
to survive.
Not even necessarily surviving.
And not succeeding at all. And so there's a lot to it, and so we're going to kind of go over some tips and stuff that should be able to help you guys. The first thing, as we've been talking about throughout this entire instructional so far, is the idea of alignment. Your body's ability to generate and absorb force maximally relative to your goals. As Rob had said, I believe it was in the very first video, it's not just position before submission, it's alignment over anything else. I can be in a really bad position, like bottom side control, bottom mount, and if I have broken alignment, everything is way worse. So like bottom side control, if Rob's cross-faced me, underhooked me, he's broken my posture by twisting my spine out this way, he's opened up my elbow, my base isn't going to be very effective because I'm facing straight up. This is a very different battle for me that I'm less likely to survive than if I'm in bottom side control and I've turned myself so I still have good posture and integrity of my spinal column, I have structure, I have efficient, effective positioning of my limbs, and I have base actually angled towards them, so as Rob's driving into me, I'm actually able to look to start moving effectively. And so we're going to eventually go into a couple videos on all the different like bottom mount, bottom side control, escaping back control, so that you guys have little 1-2 options to be able to escape and have a better idea of how to keep yourself in proper alignment and what those goals look like. But you cannot let people break your alignment. And obviously structure is the most complicated thing at first. You're trying to look at using your bones to manage the distance between you and your opponent, but especially don't allow your opponent to control your head. If you don't allow them to control your head and manipulate your spine in some horrible way, you're going to be much more likely to be able to survive.
Yeah, exactly. One of the biggest problems that people have, we've kind of talked about issues with guard passing and sweeping, and especially approaching the guard and getting overextended. Where people really run into trouble, that's for the top person, where you overcommit to something as a passer and you end up getting swept or you end up getting submitted. Obviously, of the two, getting submitted is a lot worse. So like if you have to make a mistake, it's probably better to make a mistake and get swept. So a similar thing that's going to happen as the bottom person, if I'm playing guard, as I get overextended, one, I'm going to give up the pass, but there's a difference between giving up a pass and establishing correct alignment to defend the next thing, and giving up a pass while continuing to pull or attempt offense, and then ending up in a smashed position on the bottom, whether it's mount, whether it's knee ride, whether it's side control, whatever, where so much of your alignment is instantly broken that you are now extremely vulnerable to a submission. The pathway between a guard pass, a dominant position, and a submission should still be a fairly long one. If it's just I pass your guard and I'm instantly able to armbar you or you take your back and choke you, it's a guarantee that you are massively overcommitting on your guard offense, which doesn't allow you to set up for your bottom position, negative bottom position defense. So we really want to make a distinction between I'm playing guard, let's say Rory starts to get to a knee cut position, and I'm still like, let me try to do something, and he's able to attack me, and
I'm able to land right up by your head, and I'm at least now in a position where I can start trying to attack Rob's arms immediately into armbar.
Yeah, versus let's say Rory's completing the pass, and I'm just like, okay, he's gonna pass me, but I'm okay. And then you can see I'm already in the process of regarding, so I've not just increased my chances of survival, I've increased my chances of recovery just by focusing entirely on my alignment and not overextending myself in any way.
That's something that, especially in the gi, you're going to be a lot more prone to doing, is you get these grips, and as we've talked about, they're designed to be able to push and pull, but because you're doing guard work and you want to keep your opponent in, you want to pull them into your trap, you just keep pulling even when those frames start to fail, and you'll just pull them right by you. And then also, there's a different context between if we're looking at self-defense MMA, where you want to actually stop someone from necessarily being able to create distance between you because they have the opportunity to strike you. But in traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when you're just reaching over top of somebody and controlling the back of their gi in some way, especially in the wrong circumstances, you're preventing that space from being created. Where the space is going to be your friend in this sense to be able to actually separate. So when I'm in bottom side control here, and Rob's trying to cross face me, I want these frames to be able to back him away from here. I mean, I would do this as well for self-defense, but that's a whole other thing to be talking about. But I want to create as much space as possible so that then I'm able to start replacing frames and creating more distance. Holding on to Rob right now like this, as he starts to just cross-face me, that's what he wants. And I'll see white belts just hold on and grab the key, and they'll be pulling it tight, and it's like, I'm never going to create any space, and I'm never going to turn this around for myself. So be careful about these times where, like, you want to create these pulling motions when you know that you can create some vulnerability in your opponent's alignment to be able to actually make them post, break their alignment in some way, a Kazushi movement, or actually even be able to sweep or reverse them. But a lot of the times at first when you're doing this, you're just going to be pulling them right on top of you.
And then the other thing we want to discuss, and we'll probably give specific examples of this in the individual position videos, but we have a term that we use at our academy, which is called taking your ball and going home. And what that refers to is just making zero effort to actually escape the position, just deciding to be difficult to submit. There's definitely a very popular, in some circles, wave of like, I just want to be the guy that does defense. And defense is a lot more complicated than just, let me go fetal and not move. We are all born with the ability to go fetal, like to isometrically contract super hard. That is not a defensive, it's not a high-level defensive skill. The high-level defensive skill is keeping your alignment long enough that your opponent makes a mistake that allows you to regain some position. There's no like, just do an escape and you're gonna get out of stuff. Like that's why we're talking about survival first before we talk about like actually escaping. It's quite easy to survive if, like, we'll use the mount as an example here. If I'm this guy, like, yeah, man, go ahead and try to submit me. And like, I'm so great at defense, man. I'm fucking amazing.
You're winning the fight.
Yeah, the only problem is, and not that we want to make this about in a fight I would hit you, but in a fight he would hit me, right? So if your defense is based around the idea that in a jiu-jitsu match the only way you can actually lose is if you get submitted, that's a very primitive way of thinking about it. If you have no method of actually escaping and the only thing you're concerned with is doing this, this is just not good defense, right? And again, that doesn't mean that you want to be sticking your arms up and trying to like bench press people off of you at all times. And it doesn't mean that you want to be going crazy and trying to escape when the context doesn't exist. It's just that recognize that just contracting your muscles as hard as you possibly can and doing this and making it hard for people to get on your neck, it's not defense. It can work quite well, particularly like, again, depending on where you train and who you train with. If you're not training with like pretty good, like high-level competitors, and especially ones that have a diverse game, you will develop this false sense of security or like, man, they couldn't armbar me, they couldn't choke me. Yeah, I mean, but most of the people doing jiu-jitsu really suck at offense.
This was one of the things that when we started getting more into no-gi submission-only formats within just the whole jiu-jitsu community, people were starting to get this mindset where as long as I don't get submitted, I don't technically lose. And it's like you'll have one person in a round and they'll just be completely dominated and the person will be passing their guard easily and moving into different dominant positions over and over and over, taking the back, and the person's like, yeah, but they weren't able to submit me. So it's basically even. And it's like, no, this other person had way more an understanding of the fundamentals and had clean technique and was constantly working, and while yes, you weren't submitted, so I mean, you technically were able to keep on fighting, the other person controlled you the whole time.
Yeah.
And so this is where, as Rob said, there's going to be a little bit of a difficulty where sometimes I find a white belt that just does this the whole time can be a little bit harder to submit than the blue belt that now is starting to learn the fundamentals of how to do some movements, because they're really developing those, they'll already have a fundamental understanding of the escapes, but just like in boxing, someone doing this, it's going to be quite hard to land a punch at any point. But as soon as people start opening up, then they have the ability to get countered.
Yeah.
And so there's this hard part to go through with your ego where if you are used to just doing this and surviving, when you actually start to try and escape, you're going to fuck some things up and you're actually going to get submitted. But that should not deter you from continuing developing those skills.
Exactly. A good example of this is you'll see higher belts sometimes, especially like the lazier, older, fatter ones who are like, I'm just going to work on my defense in this round. And they start like this, and they just like allow a guard pass, and then let's just rotate towards the camera. and then they just kind of turn away like this, and they're like, man, my defense is amazing. Like, this is not good defense. You know, the tricky thing about developing good defense is I want to be able to apply it when it's necessary. So the tricky part is deciding how to go from, you know, a frame-based defense to a shell-based defense to a turning away-based defense. All these things are a little bit different and have an appropriate context. But if all you ever do is fully open up your guard and just hide from people trying to choke you like this, again, from the perspective of switching to MMA or self-defense or dealing with strikes, or frankly just dealing with people who are better at controlling you, people who have more wrestling aspects of their game, or more judo or sambo or whatever, where they don't use the same conventional jiu-jitsu controls that are somewhat vulnerable to someone just shelling up and not giving you anything. Unless you understand that context, you don't actually have good defense. What you have is a good passive game that makes it harder for someone to submit you, while you still, in a competition context, get scored on all over the place and have no ability to score back. Or in a self-defense or MMA context, end up in a position where somebody just Donkey Kongs the shit out of you. So we really encourage people to understand what defense is. Defense is not just laying on bottom and defending your neck so that you don't get choked. It's being able to transition between those things and actually effective movements to escape or regard, or even transition into offense. Like, if you're quite good at maintaining your alignment on bottom and people get too aggressive with their offense, you may even be able to transition directly into submissions, which is something we'll probably cover in definitely the knee ride escape video.
Definitely. Yeah. And as a smaller point too, like this, while it's an individual sport and you're focused on your own development, you're working with a team. The people that, if you don't have other people to train with, your teammates, you're not going to be able to get good at jiu-jitsu. And honestly, while that's surviving and just doing nothing for a while will work against white belts and blue belts and even purple belts to an extent, depending on the level, I don't know anyone that actually enjoys rolling with those people, because it shuts down development on both fronts.
Yes.
And so I'm not saying, because the whole purpose of jiu-jitsu is to make life uncomfortable for that other person, crush them and be able to submit them, but there's constant movement. You guys are training, and you probably only have so many hours a week that you actually do training, and so it's about experiencing jiu-jitsu and having these movements back and forth. So by being the person on bottom that just shuts down, takes their ball and goes, I'm not going to get tapped, you're not moving much. And while you are creating a problem that the person has to try and figure out, it can be quite difficult to do so, especially at lower levels. Yeah. But by trying to actually properly fight back and escape, you might screw up and actually get advanced on even further or get submitted, but that'll eventually start to subside. Or you'll actually be framing them out, you'll be able to start regarding, or you'll be able to actually start threatening a submission possibly from like some horrible position, that then they have to react to that, and then they're going to be learning and they're going to be getting better, and you're going back and forth with movements rather than one person just kind of like a bear pawing at the person in a field position and getting bored and being like, well, I don't want to roll with Rory any. That, like, if I only have so many rounds this week that I can train, why would I waste it with Rory? Because as soon as I pass this guard, he just turtles up and we don't do anything for 3 minutes. And it's just, I'm not getting any better.
Yeah, and that's even more true with quite physically strong people. And when I say physically strong, I mean isometrically strong, because not everybody has like a big bench press, but some people just have the ability, I mean, like I said, we're all born with the ability to just isometrically contract our muscles, and that is where we are the strongest. Like, even fairly weak people, if they just go like this, it can be quite difficult to move their arms. But if you're actually quite strong, and particularly if you've got a really strong grip, like I see 240-pound guys with somebody on their back and they're just like, yeah, I'm gonna hold your wrist. Well, yeah, I mean, you're rolling with somebody who's like 100 pounds lighter than you. Of course you can hold their wrist. That's not good defense. So even when we're talking about, you know, not even just this isometric contraction, which everyone can abuse, but as a stronger individual, the attribute of grip strength that will allow you to just prevent things from happening. Imagine doing that against somebody who has 50 pounds on you. Would it be a good idea? That's a good way to judge, is your defensive application, is it valid or not? If it's only working on people who are smaller, weaker, less experienced, or more experienced in some areas but not highly experienced in offense, if it's only working on those people, then you don't have good defense. You're just abusing attributes, and that will ultimately, the only cost is to you. You're going to be laboring under this misapprehension that you're killer at defense, when really you're just a strong person who's abusing attributes, and no one's going to want to roll with you. So eventually you're going to hit a wall where you're going to roll with people who are good enough to exploit it, and you're going to have a rude awakening, or you're not, in which case you're just always going to suck.
Yeah, and so it's important to note that we're not shitting on the idea of surviving, and sometimes there'll be moments where even at higher levels like black belt, where if Rob's got me in a really bad position, I just go, man, if I move this way for a second, I die, and if I move this way, I die. And so I'm just like, okay, I'm going to have my alignment fixed as best as I can, and I'm doing so temporarily knowing that I'm eventually going to force Rob to move a little bit. I am essentially trying to bore this bear that's on top of me, that he's going to eventually start to move to change the angle to address this problem, and then as he does, then I'm going to try and move. And so you can do it, but it's got to be for these small windows to create an opportunity that it's like, okay, I'm going to frustrate this person as they move, then I'm going to go straight into my escapes.
Yeah, and it's this point is very much akin to when we talk about how to roll. For the most part, we want to roll for development, but we also want to roll for experience, like getting ready for competition, experience getting ready for potentially self-defense. In those scenarios, 100%. If you want to take your ball and go home, that's totally valid. What we're talking about is how do we develop? And for a beginner, the worst thing you can do for development is encourage extreme amounts of isometric tension. Once you're able to move around and fix your alignment and escape properly within the context of creating movement and recognizing opportunities, totally, you can start to drill down to, okay, now let's say I can't do any of that. How do I make sure this motherfucker doesn't choke me? Then it's totally fine to do this. We're not saying never. We're saying if you want to develop faster earlier, minimize the amount of time you spend trying to take your ball and go home, and maximize the amount of time you spend, I don't want to say taking risks, but making calculated decisions to try to get out of the position you're in, because you will learn much more from that, and you will learn much more from situations where your partner is able to move you around and where you are focusing on moving around than you will from situations where you're focusing on shutting down movement entirely.